speaking Spanish. You know, there's so many times that I wanted to open up a dialogue, and I wanted to talk to people, but we didn't have I felt like we didn't, not, it wasn't necessarily my poor Spanish, but we just didn't have a common perspective or point of view or a common vocabulary for discussing these things, because a lot of the things we're talking about and I was impressed with was their frugality and their understanding of resource use. Because I mean, you go to places where they have 5 gallons of water a day and that's it. You know what I mean? And they have to share it as a community, and they might have to walk a kilometer or two to get it. And usually it's the young girls who have to go and get that for their family. And it's heavy. And so, yeah, they don't waste anything. They use the water that they cooked with, the excess water, they might use that to wash their dishes and then to wash their hands, and then they might use that to water their plants afterwards. And so everything, and this isn't in every situation, but I found the areas that were very poor and rural, the areas that were very poor and rural, they really were already living very sustainably, and they didn't know the word, and they'd never heard of environmentalism, but they're just living that way because that was the best way to use the resources, and it kept them alive and healthier. And I think that's a pretty common theme. When people are poor, especially in rural areas, they learn how to use the resources in an effective, efficient way, and I learned a lot from that. It was an amazing thing that people can pretty much live without money, and I hope to take those skills that I picked up and apply them to here into my life. Otherwise I would feel like it was a waste.
Were they healthy, folks? Were they healthy?
I think there were nutritional imbalances, partially because of lack of access and education of a healthy, balanced diet. Sometimes lack of access to seeds for green vegetables. Sometimes cultural things where, maybe they don't like to eat fresh vegetables. They cook everything. And a lot of it is just, lack of diversity. I mean, in most parts of Latin America, the dominant diet is corn, beans, a lot of white processed flour and oil, and a lot of fried foods, which weren't traditionally in their society, but now it's a cheap alternative, and it tastes good. People like it, and I ate a lot of fried food down there. And then you have a lot of issues like unsanitary water, Giardia, E. coli, amoebic dysentery. And a lot of, especially younger people, it's hard to develop immunity to those type of things. I'm not even sure if it's possible to develop immunity to everything, the amoebic dysentery, for instance. And so they're living with, chronic diarrhea that can cause organ damage. And you have a lot of basic issues like that, just not clean drinking water,
So a lot of those communities aren't living a permaculture way, in other words. They've been still influenced by society to some degree.
Of course.
That they've...
I mean, a permaculture way, I don't even know if that would be a good way to put it, but I feel like we can learn a lot from them, but there are some basic things that we take for granted that they don't have. If they had the education and the extra resources, they could fix their own problems.
Like seeds and water filtration.
Just like dealing with black water, dealing with effluent. In a productive way, especially composting toilet systems, keeping it out of the waterways. I mean, here in the United States, I don't know if you're aware, we defecate in 3/4 of our drinking water. And so if we didn't have these large centralized systems of water purification that are very energy intensive, use a lot of chemicals, and require centralization to function, we would be contaminating our own water too. We are contaminating our own water, but fortunately we're able to filter it out, add chlorine later, or whatever treatment they're using, whatever chemical, and that allows us to have the benefit of drinking water, which of course we take for granted in a lot of places. Although in Colorado, you go out into the country, you go out into the small towns, and they're on wells, and they're very aware of their water. And I've even been in places where they felt like they couldn't spare any to me, and that was hard to deal with. But it depends on where you are in your watershed and your region. But I would recommend to everybody out there in the world, if this actually reaches you, to read a book called The Open Veins of Latin America, if you want to get a general perspective on basically how Latin America's resources have been exploited by the Western world in the last 500 years. From the Spanish, Portuguese, English up to North America, and how that has affected their economies, their political culture, their environment, and their poverty. And I think that it shows and makes a pretty good argument that a lot of our wealth, a lot of our creativity, a lot of the music we've created, the art we've created, the technology comes from the wealth of these third world countries and the energy we've gained from them that has allowed us this affluence. And I think that's an important thing to understand for people, for instance, who are complaining about illegal aliens coming to our country so that they can make probably no more than $15 or $20 an hour at the most, doing labor jobs. Maybe you should look at it as a payback. Maybe they should have access to the affluent country that their resources helped create, and the poverty that they're living in. I mean, there's no easy fix. You can say stay in your country and fix it yourself, but continually the Western dominant powers has not allowed them to do that. Every time they want to nationalize their resources and sell them at a market value or use them locally, there's a military coup. We trained some, army to go in there in the School of the Americas, and this is all available through the Freedom of Information Act. The CIA, causes a military coup, and then look, there's a genocide, and 10,000 people are murdered, or 100,000, or in the case of Chile, 300,000. And so, they've been living in this climate of instability and violence and poverty for so long. And for most of it, they just grit their teeth and they keep living, and they don't complain that much because it hasn't done any good historically. And I think people need to keep that in mind when they start complaining about them taking our jobs and whatnot. And if you really want to believe in true capitalism and true competition, you open up the borders and you let them compete, and I guarantee they outcompete us for a while. Yeah, they take our jobs because that's what capitalism, that's what competition's all about. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with true Darwinian competition and capitalism, but if you really believe in it, that might be a different way of looking at it, you know what I mean? So, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
What's your name?
Casey Kellogg Wilson.
From
Portland, Oregon.
Huh.
Born and raised. One of the few. Born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Just turned 30 years old a little while ago.
And you biked from friggin' where to where?
I biked from technically from Arcata, California down to Tierra del Fuego, which is technically an island separated by the Magellan Strait between Chile and Argentina, and then I biked back from there through Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, the Brazilian Amazon, Venezuela, Colombia, up through Central America, Mexico, and now I crossed the border a month ago, and I'm glad to be home.
Anyway, well, welcome back.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well,
I feel like the fight for me, the struggle for me is here at my home, where I speak the language, where I understand the culture a little bit better. I feel like I can be the most effective here, and that's what brought me back.
Do you have a website?
I don't.
And maybe it can be, what's